We are continuing to follow the case of millionaire real estate heir Robert Durst, now charged with murder for the shooting death of his friend. Durst has also been a suspect in the 1982 disappearance of his wife. Now, author and investigative journalist Matt Birbeck wrote about the case in the book A Deadly Secret: The Strange Disappearance of Kathy Durst. He joins us now. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
Now, his wife disappeared many years ago. The body was never found. How is this going to be related to that, do you think?
Well, the FBI is involved now, and they've been involved for about 5 years. They looked at Durst in another case here in New York as a potential suspect. That didn't pan out, but they became very intrigued by the Kathy Durst case, as well as where Durst had lived throughout the country. So I think now, you know, the one thing they lacked was any real solid evidence. They didn't have a body. They didn't have much DNA evidence. But now if they can convict Robert Durst for killing Susan Berman, they'll have a motive. And that was to quiet her because she knew that he had killed Kathy Durst.
Now, you say the FBI believed that Durst may have been involved in another case. That's the first we've heard of it. What case is that?
It's a case out of Long Island in 2010 where roughly a dozen women, some prostitutes and transients, their bodies were found. Some were dismembered. The police saw Durst as a potential suspect and looked into it. They eventually cleared him, but they became enamored with him. And when they took a deep look at him, they realized that he had been living, which is something I reported some years ago, he had been living in cities throughout the country and doing there what he had been doing in these cases, which is assuming different identities, you know, masquerading as a woman. So they became completely intrigued. They've been working with New York authorities, they've been working with Los Angeles, and they're working in other jurisdictions now where Durst had lived before.
Now, you believe Durst is guilty of several murders. If so, how do you think he was able to evade authorities all of these years?
You know, it's a combination of luck. It was a combination, unfortunately, of some bad police work. You know, instead of taking a global view of Robert Durst 10 years ago, when he was being prosecuted in Galveston, you know, the different jurisdictions were kind of working within themselves. And then when he was acquitted in Galveston, you know, things kind of went by the wayside. I think the introduction of the FBI, especially in New York and now in Los Angeles, I think that was a game changer.
There's so many interesting details here. First of all, that he's involved in this wealthy, powerful family, so that comes into play, as well as the fact that when he was on the lam, supposedly in Texas, he was dressed as a deaf, mute woman. There are so many interesting details. What did you find remarkable as you were observing and studying this case along the way?
You know, I thought the case itself is bizarre, as you just said. You know, given, you know, what he's been doing, you know, masquerading as a woman, dismembering people, which he apparently had experience doing. So, and living in different cities. And, you know, I found the case to be remarkable in not just what he was doing, but in what law enforcement. You know, in my book, you know, I write about what was going on behind the scenes within the different jurisdictions. And it was somewhat problematic, you know, especially in New York, you know, with the district attorney at the time there, and how she had basically, you know, taken the case. You know, it had been investigated by the state police, by a detective named Joe Becerra. He's the one who actually got this whole thing going, and you rarely hear about him. In fact, you only saw maybe 30 seconds of him in the HBO documentary, which was somewhat of a travesty because he's the guy that got this started. The other thing is that there's an issue here now in that they did not reach out to Susan Berman, meaning the New York police, until after she died. And the storyline now that we've been hearing is that Jeanine Pirro, who was the former Westchester District Attorney, tried to reach out to her and scheduled an interview before she was killed. That's not, what they're going to find is that's not on the record. So there's little bits and pieces of the story. Actually, there's a lot of bits and pieces. It's a bizarre tale, and it's one that's continuing.
So many complexities. What was remarkable to you about Durst's personality as you observed him? I
thought he was cold, unfeeling, humorless. You know, he basically tried to explain his way, you know, through these different, you know, alleged murders in a very cold and calculating way. I thought that, though, you really saw Robert Durst, as I mentioned earlier, in the last 3 minutes, when he goes to the bathroom and he starts talking to himself, and he's having a conversation, and he talks about how, like, I'm caught. And then he says, kill them all. And, you know, that's the Robert Durst that I knew. And I think that's finally the Robert Durst that everyone saw.
Shocking and compelling television, shocking and compelling details. Mike Birbeck, biographer for Robert Durst, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.